It was hailed as a priceless piece of Indian history, a stunning, intricately carved statue from the Gupta era with an auction estimate of $. Experts lauded its delicate features, its sense of serene power, a lost treasure miraculously rediscovered. But this masterpiece wasn't dug up from the ground. It was cooked up in a garage. For years, the Singh family, and names some of you might even recognize from the fringes of the reality television world, hasn't just been fooling TV audiences. They've been fooling the entire art world. And we have the video to prove it. This is the story of a crime so audacious, so brilliant in its deception, that it has sent shockwaves from the back alleys of Delhi to the most prestigious auction houses in New York. This is a national scandal. This story goes deeper than you can possibly imagine. And if you want to be the first to get these kinds Hall of Insider reports and exclusive updates that peel back the curtain on these shocking stories, you need to hit that subscribe button right now. Ring the bell so you don't miss a single detail, and give this video a chance to tell the algorithm that you demand the truth. Now let's get back to the lie that cost millions to the outside world, and especially to the online community that followed their journey. The Singh family was the picture of a modern multicultural success story. At the center of this picture for Western audiences, at least, was Jenny, the American woman who had moved across the world for love to marry the charming and ambitious Sumit Singh. Their story had all the hallmarks of a fan-favorite reality TV plotline. The initial culture shock, the challenges of blending families, the eventual triumph of love over adversity. On social media, Jenny curated a beautiful narrative. Her posts were filled with vibrant pictures from local markets, heartfelt captions about embracing her new Indian family, and videos of her mother-in-law teaching her traditional recipes. She presented the Singhs as a wholesome, tight-knit unit deeply connected to their cultural roots. A key part of this image was the family's side business, a respectable venture they described as collecting and trading local antiques. On their carefully designed website, and through Denny's popular blog, they showcased what appeared to be a genuine passion for preserving Indian heritage. They posted articles about the history of different artistic periods and shared photos of Sumit and his father Anil carefully cleaning a dusty, old-looking pot or examining a weathered textile. They were portrayed as custodians of history, small-time enthusiasts who occasionally found a remarkable piece that they would then sell to discerning collectors to fund their passion. The narrative was perfect, a family business grounded in tradition, bridging the gap between ancient Indian artistry and modern Western appreciation. They weren't just selling objects, they were selling a story, the story of a family dedicated to history, a story that Jenny, the relatable American, made accessible and trustworthy to an international audience. Their modest two-story home in a quiet suburb was presented as the heart of this wholesome enterprise, a place of warmth, family, and cultural reverence. But behind the locked door of the garage, a very different reality was being manufactured. The wholesome family business was a complete and utter fabrication. The entire lifestyle that Jenny so proudly displayed online, the comfortable home, the nice car suits, designer clothes, their occasional lavish vacations, was funded by a criminal enterprise of breathtaking audacity. The Singh family home was not a hub of cultural preservation. It was the secret headquarters of one of the most sophisticated art forgery rings in the country's recent history. For over years, this quiet suburban house had been a factory for fake history, a place where the past was not discovered but meticulously, brilliantly, and illegally invented. The patriarch Anil Singh was the dark heart of the operation. In his youth, he had been a genuinely gifted artist, a sculptor and painter with a deep understanding of classical Indian forms. But the art world had been unkind to him. He faced rejection after rejection, his original work dismissed as too traditional, too derivative. The bitterness curdled his talent into a tool for revenge against the very establishment that had scorned him. He became a frustrated master, his genius for creation twisted into a genius for imitation. He wasn't just copying art, he was channeling the spirit of ancient masters, recreating their techniques with a level of skill that was, by all accounts, extraordinary. His workshop in the garage was a world away from the tidy, respectable image of an antique stealer. It was a laboratory of deception. The air hung thick with the smell of chemicals, dust, and ozone. Advanced power tools lay next to hand-carved chisels designed to mimic the marks of ancient craftsmen. There were vats for acid baths to artificially aged stone, kilns for firing terracotta with deliberate imperfections, and complex recipes for pigments that could fool carbon dating tests, at least superficially. O'Neill wasn't just an artist. He was a chemist, historian, and a master criminal. His son Sumit was the modern face of the crime. While Anil provided the product, Sumit built the empire. He was the tech-savvy, charismatic dealer who turned his father's forgeries into untraceable cash. He managed a network of websites with names, suggested legitimacy and historical expertise, Ganges Valley Antiquities, Himalayan Heritage Arts. Each site was a masterpiece of digital deception, complete with fake testimonials, carefully crafted provenance documents tracing the fictional history of each piece, and high-resolution photographs taken, with professional lighting to highlight their authenticity. Sumit was a master of online marketing and social engineering. He operated on the dark web, in private collector forums, and through encrypted messaging apps connecting with a specific type of buyer, wealthy Western tourists, and mid-level international collectors. These were people with enough money to want a piece of history, but not enough resources or institutional hacking to conduct the expensive forensic testing like thermoluminescence dating or mass spectrometry that would have instantly exposed the fakes. Sumit knew his market. He knew they were buying the story as much as the object. He would speak to them of pieces from a private family collection in Rajasthan or unearthed during construction near a historic site. He built relationships, established trust, and then ruthlessly exploited it. Over a decade and a half, their coordinated efforts had netted them an astonishing sum over $1 million laundered through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. The foundational life of their existence that their income came from legitimate courses was propped up by a constant daily effort of high-stakes criminal performance. But Anil and Sumit were not working alone. For the past 5 years, the true engine of their most brilliant and profitable forgeries was not the aging master, but a young, overlooked woman named Ishita Sharma. Ishita was a prodigy, an art student from a poor rural family with a raw, almost supernatural talent. She had arrived in the city with nothing but a scholarship to a local art college and a burning desire to create. Anil discovered her at a student exhibition, where her work, even in its unrefined state, showed a breathtaking ability to mimic different historical styles. He saw in her not a student to be mentored, but a resource to be plundered. He took her on as his apprentice, a title that masked a cruel and systematic exploitation. He promised to guide her, to refine her talent, to make her his artistic heir. For a poor girl with no connections, it was a dream come true. A great master had recognized her genius. The reality was a nightmare. Anil paid her a pittance, a meager stipend that barely covered her rent and food, all while her creations were being sold for sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. He became a vampire of talent, draining her of her artistic energy and genius. He would bring her ancient texts and archaeological photos, not to teach her history, but to give her blueprints for their next forgery. He used her nimble fingers and sharp eyes for the most delicate work, painting the faded frescoes on panels of ancient wood, sculpting the serene faces of Gupta-era deities, and mastering the complex lost wax technique to cast Chola dynasty bronzes. He would stand over her for hours, coaching, criticizing, pushing her to make her work not just good, but indistinguishable from the real thing. He was stealing her art, her youth, and her future, all under the guise of mentorship. Ishita, isolated and indebted to him, felt trapped. She was creating masterpieces, works of stunning beauty and technical brilliance. She could never claim them. She was a ghost, her genius attributed to long-dead craftsmen. Her award, a handful of rupees. While the Singh family built a life of luxury on the fruits of her stolen labor, the promise of a future as a celebrated artist was always just around the corner, a carrot dangled by Anil to ensure her continued compliance. She was the secret ingredient, the overlooked female protagonist in a story dominated by the greed of two men. But Ishita was not just a victim, she was a witness. As the years went on, the initial gratitude she felt towards Anil slowly curdled into suspicion, and then into a cold, quiet rage. She saw the vast difference between the pittance she was paid and the new car Sumit drove. She heard the hushed, excited phone calls about sales to collectors in London and Zurich. The lie became too big to ignore. 2 years before the family's downfall, she began to document her captivity. It started as a way to preserve her own work, to have, and proof that she was the artist behind these creations. But it quickly evolved into a calculated effort to gather evidence. Using a cheap smartphone she kept hidden, Ashita started a secret video diary. She recorded everything time lapses of her hands covered in clay and dust, transforming a shapeless block of stone into an exquisite sculpture over weeks of painstaking work. Videos of her mixing pigments according to Anil's ancient formulas, her voiceover quietly explaining the process. She captured the entire damning workflow of their criminal enterprise. This video diary became the core smoking gun evidence. It was an undeniable step-by-step guide to their forgery process, narrated by the very artist they were exploiting. In one series of clips, she documents the complete creation of the dollar Gupta-era statue that would later become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. The video starts with a rough block of soapstone and, through a mesmerizing speed-up sequence, shows her chiseling, sanding, and aging the piece until it becomes the priceless artifact that would fool the world. She also made secret audio recordings. On these, Anil's voice can be heard clear as day, coaching her, pushing her. In one chilling recording, he instructs her on how to replicate the specific alloy and patina of Akola dynasty bronze. No more copper, he says, his voice sharp with impatience. The originals had a slightly warmer tone, and when you bury it in the compost heap, make sure the fertilizer is acidic. We need the corrosion to look natural. Years of natural Ishita's secret archive was more than just a diary. It was a meticulously compiled indictment, a digital time bomb waiting for the right moment to detonate and obliterate the Singh family's world of lies. She was no longer just an apprentice, she was the architect of their destruction. However, the event that would ultimately bring down the Singh empire didn't come from Ishita. The initial betrayal came from within their own network of corruption. For years, a key component of their operation was a corrupt customs official named Rajan. Anil had him on a steady payroll, bribing him with thick envelopes of cash to sign off on fraudulent export documents. These documents were works of art in themselves, listing the priceless forgeries as low-value handicrafts or reproduction souvenirs, allowing them to be shipped out of the country without scrutiny. The arrangement was smooth and profitable for both sides for over a decade. But as the operation grew, so did the Singh arrogance. Sumit, in particular, began to see Rajan not as a partner in crime, but as a hired hand. During one transaction, a particularly valuable shipment destined for a collector in Germany, Sumit decided to cut Rajan's payment. He argued that the risk was low and that Rajan was already being paid too much. It was a fatal miscalculation. Rajan, a man who had staked his career and freedom on this arrangement, was deeply insulted and enraged. The dispute over the payment was the final straw. His loyalty, which had always been purely financial, evaporated in an instant. Feeling disrespected and cheated, Rajan decided to burn the whole operation to the ground. He made an anonymous phone call, not to the local police, but to the Archaeological Survey of India, the powerful federal agency responsible for protecting the nation's cultural heritage. In that single call, he laid out the entire scheme. And to prove he was telling the truth, he provided them with something invaluable copies of every single fake customs document Anil had ever filed. For the first time, authorities had a clear picture of the staggering scale of the smuggling operation. The documents were a roadmap of their crimes, listing dates, shipping routes, and the declared and fraudulent values of dozens of artifacts sent to buyers across Europe, North America, and Asia. The internal betrayal born of greed and hubris had just opened the floodgates. The anonymous tip was not just a lead, it was a declaration of war. The tip-off from the disgruntled customs agent acted like a lit match on a trail of gasoline. The Archaeological Survey of India, or ASI, is not your local police force. They are a federal agency with a sweeping mandate, and they treat crimes against cultural heritage with the utmost seriousness. The information provided by Rajan was a bombshell, revealing an operation far larger and more sophisticated than they could have imagined. Within days, a multi-agency task force was assembled, including financial crime investigators. The federal police, they worked quickly and quietly, cross-referencing the shipping documents with flight manifests, tracking summits, online activities, and beginning surveillance on the Singh family's unassuming suburban home. They were building an ironclad case before making their move. The raid happened at dawn on a quiet Tuesday morning as the neighborhood was just beginning to stir. A convoy of unmarked vehicles descended upon Singh St. Federal agents clad in tactical gear swarmed the property, creating a perimeter before a specialized unit used a battering ram to smash through the front door. The scene inside was one of pure chaos and disbelief. Jenny, likely in the middle of her morning coffee, was confronted with the terrifying sight of armed officers storming into her home, shouting for everyone to get on the ground. Sumit and Anil were pulled from their beds, their faces a mask of shock and confusion. The carefully constructed facade of their peaceful family life was shattered in an instant, but the real discovery was in the garage. After forcing a bewildered Anil to unlock it, the agents stepped into the secret world he had hidden for years. It was exactly as Ashita's future testimony would describe, a forger's paradise. Half-finished statues stood on workbenches like silent stone witnesses. Tools of every description were scattered about. Vials of chemicals and acids were lined up on shelves, their labels hinting at their nefarious purpose, artificial aging and patination. They found sketchbooks filled with Anil's detailed drawings, copies of ancient designs with his own notes scribbled in the margins. In Sumit's room, they seized laptops and hard drives, which would later reveal the full extent of his digital empire, the encrypted chats with buyers, the records of cryptocurrency transactions, and the ghost websites he used to lure his victims. The case was immediately elevated beyond simple fraud. The evidence of the workshop, combined with the customs officials' documents, pointed to a vast criminal conspiracy. The charges quickly piled up. This wasn't just about making and selling fakes. It was about the systematic looting of a nation's identity for profit. The things were charged with smuggling, a federal offense, marrying severe penalties. They were charged with money laundering for hiding the dollar, million in profits, and most seriously, they were charged with racketeering under laws typically reserved for organized crime syndicates. The state was arguing that the Singh family was not a family of dealers but a criminal enterprise, an art dealer crime family that had waged a year war on India's cultural heritage. The raid marked the end of the lie, and the beginning of a legal battle that would captivate the nation. The trial of Anil and Sumit Singh became a landmark case, a media sensation that dominated the news cycle for weeks. It was more than just a criminal proceeding, it was a public spectacle. To put the entire art world on trial, the courtroom was packed every day with journalists, art historians, students, and the morbidly curious. The prosecution spared no expense flying and experts from around the world to testify. One after another, museum curators, archaeologists, and conservation scientists took the stand. They explained to the jury the incredible sophistication of the forgeries. They presented slides showing microscopic analysis of tool marks, chemical breakdowns of pigments, and spectrographic data of the metal alloys. The consensus was unanimous. The forgeries were of an exceptionally high quality, designed to fool not just the amateur eye, but seasoned experts as well. In a moment that would be quoted in headlines across the country, a renowned art historian from the UK, who had once authenticated one of Singh fakes for a London auction house, looked at the lead prosecutor and described the work as diabolically brilliant. He confessed that Anil and Ishita had not just copied the style, but had captured the very essence. The soul of the ancient artists, his testimony, and others like it painted a portrait of Anil not as a simple crook, but as a twisted maestro, a dark genius who had used his immense talent for cultural vandalism. The defense attorneys did their best to create reasonable doubt. They argued that Anil was merely a brilliant replica artist, creating high-quality souvenirs that were then unscrupulously sold as genuine articles by his son Sumit without his knowledge. They tried to portray Sumit as a naive young man who got in over his head, misled by shady international dealers. They attempted to paint Sheeta Sharma, the prosecution's star witness, as a scorned apprentice, a co-conspirator who turned on her mentors to save herself. They attacked her character, her motives, her reliability. For a few days, their strategy seemed to be sowing seeds of confusion in the jury's minds. Then the prosecution unveiled its ultimate weapon, Sheeta's video diary. The courtroom fell silent as the lights were dimmed and a large screen flickered to life. The first video played was the time-lapse of Ishita creating the dollar Gupta-era statue. The entire courtroom watched, mesmerized, as a rough-sided block of stone was transformed over a period of what appeared to be mere minutes. They saw her hands, a blur of motion, expertly chipping away stone. They saw her use dental drills for fine details, then painstakingly sand the surface. They saw her apply a chemical wash, bake the statue under heat lamps, and then strategically chip a piece off the base to simulate age and damage. The final frame of the video was a still shot of the finished statue, identical to the one sitting on the evidence table in the middle of the courtroom. A wave of audible gasps swept through the gallery. The jury was visibly stunned. The defense attorneys slumped in their chairs, their faces pale. Anil Singh stared at the screen, his expression unreadable, watching his life-old dark secret play out for the world to see. Sumit refused to look, his head buried in his hands. The prosecution played more videos. Ishita casting a chola bronze, painting a Mughal miniature, carefully fraying the edges of a historic textile. They played the audio recordings, and Anil's voice filled the courtroom, instructing his apprentice on the fine art of deception, the digital ghost. When the garage had materialized in the courtroom and its testimony was irrefutable, Ishita's secret diary didn't just support the prosecution's case. It sealed it. The videos were the ultimate smoking gun, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind about the guilt of the Singh family and the breathtaking scale of their fraud. At that moment, the trial was effectively over. The day of the judgment was a somber, media-saturated affair. The judge, a stern, highly respected figure known for his scholarly approach to law, read his verdict to a silent courtroom. He began by addressing the quality of the forgeries, echoing the expert's testimony, and calling them works of perverse genius. But he quickly turned from admiration to condemnation. He spoke of the crime not in terms of financial loss, but in terms of cultural desecration. He declared that the Singh's actions were not merely fraud, but an assault on the soul of India. He spoke of history as a sacred trust, a story that belongs to all citizens, and he accused Anil and Sumit of attempting to poison that story for their own selfish greed. "You did not just steal money," the judge stated, his voice ringing with authority. "You tried to steal history itself. You manufactured lies and sold them as truth, contaminating our collective memory and making a mockery of the legacy of our ancestors." He decided to make an example of them, citing the massive scale of the operation, its year duration, and the incalculable damage done to the nation's reputation in the international art market. He handed down sentences of unprecedented severity for this type of crime. Anil Singh, the master forger and the architect of the scheme, was sentenced to years. In a federal prison, Sumit Singh, the modern dealer who built the criminal enterprise and laundered its profits, received a sentence of years. The heavy sentences were designed to send a clear message. Crimes against cultural heritage would be treated as crimes against the nation itself. Then the judge turned his attention to Ishita Sharma. He acknowledged her role in the creation of the forgeries, stating that she was, in the eyes of the law, a participant. However, he also acknowledged the overwhelming evidence of her exploitation. He spoke of the power imbalance, the meager pay, and Anil's manipulation of a young, vulnerable artist in exchange for her complete cooperation and damning testimony. And in recognition of her status as a victim, he gave her a far more lenient sentence, 5 years of probation and hours of mandatory community service. The service was to be performed at the ASI's restoration labs, where she would now use her diabolically brilliant skills not to create fakes, but to help preserve and restore genuine artifacts. For Achita, it was a chance at redemption, a path to reclaim her talent for a legitimate purpose. For Anil Unsaman, it was the beginning of a long, dark RD. Behind bars, the fall of the House of Singh was as swift as it was total. The reckoning was not just about prison time. It was about the complete erasure of the life they had built on lies. Under the racketeering convictions, the government was empowered to seize all assets determined to be proceeds of crime. This meant everything. The family home, which had served as their headquarters, was confiscated. The cars, the furniture, the bank accounts, both domestic, and the hidden offshore ones that Summit's hard drives had revealed were all frozen and seized. The millions they had so carefully accumulated was gone, forfeited to the state. The illusion of their respectable upper middle-class life evaporated, leaving nothing behind. The fallout rippled across the globe. International museums and wealthy private collectors who had proudly displayed their Singh acquisitions were forced into a humiliating public spectacle. By institutions in New York, Paris, and Tokyo had to issue press releases admitting they had been duped. The scandal triggered a crisis of confidence. In the mid-level art market, with collectors everywhere frantically having their pieces re-examined, the name Singh became synonymous with fraud, a cautionary tale whispered in auction houses and galleries worldwide. The family's legacy was not one of art, but of infamy. But the most tragic figure in this final act was Jenny. She was never charged with a crime, as investigators concluded. She was likely kept in the dark about the specifics of the family business, a willing but perhaps ignorant beneficiary of its profits. She was, in the end, just another victim of their deception.